Sing Sing Correctional Facility, Ossining, New York. 2:34 p.m. Saturday, March 16, 1957. The air in D Block carries the weight of broken dreams and industrial disinfectant. Outside, the Hudson River flows past the limestone walls like liquid freedom, but inside these corridors, time moves differently. Slower. Heavier. The afternoon shift has settled into its rhythm, guards walking their beats, inmates finding their corners, and the delicate ecosystem of respect and violence maintaining its brutal balance. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sits at a steel table in the common area, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights as he reads a worn copy of Marcus Garvey's philosophy. At 51, he carries himself with the quiet authority of a man who has never needed to raise his voice to be heard. His prison uniform is pressed despite the laundry's best efforts to reduce him to just another number. The guards know his name. The inmates know better than to test him. But knowledge and wisdom are not the same thing. 3 men approach from the East Corridor, fresh transfers from Attica. Victor Red Kowalski leads them, a pale, freckled giant with knuckles scarred from a decade of proving himself the hard way. His lieutenants, Tommy Marcone and Earl the Hammer Davidson, flank him like hunting dogs eager for blood. Red has been making noise for 2 weeks about Harlem gangsters getting too much respect in a white man's prison. He has been saying it loud enough for Bumpy to hear. That was his first mistake. "Look what we got here," Red announces, his voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. The famous Bumpy Johnson, reading his little book like some kind of professor. Bumpy doesn't look up. He turns a page with methodical precision. The silence that follows isn't empty, it's pregnant with possibility. Heavy with the promise of consequences. Red steps closer, his shadow falling across the pages of philosophy. "I'm talking to you, boy. Didn't your mama teach you manners down in the jungle?" The slur hangs in the air like a lit fuse. Conversations die. Cards are placed face down on tables. Men who have survived decades behind bars recognize the moment before the storm breaks. Bumpy closes his book slowly, removes his glasses with care, and folds them with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. When he looks up at Red, his eyes hold no anger. They hold mathematics, cold, brutal calculation. "You should walk away," Bumpy says, his voice barely above a whisper. Red laughs, a harsh, ugly sound that echoes off the concrete walls. Tommy and Earl join in, their laughter mixing with their leaders like a pack of hyenas. "Or what, Grandpa? You gonna read me a bedtime story?" The punch comes fast and vicious. Red's fist connects with Bumpy's nose. The crack of cartilage breaking is sharp and clean, audible across the common area. Blood explodes across the pages of Marcus Garvey's words, staining philosophy with violence. Bumpy's head snaps back, but he doesn't fall. He doesn't even blink. He simply touches his nose, looks at the blood on his fingers, and smiles. That smile makes Red's laughter die in his throat like a strangled animal. Bumpy stands slowly, blood streaming down his face, soaking his pressed uniform. He pulls a handkerchief from his pocket and dabs at his nose with the same care he used to fold his glasses. His eyes never leave Red's face. 2 hours, Bumpy says, his voice carrying the finality of a judge passing sentence. You have 2 hours to make peace with whatever god you pray to. The guards rush in with whistles and clubs, separating the men, writing their reports, following their procedures. They put Bumpy in solitary for fighting, standard protocol. What they don't understand is that solitary confinement isn't punishment for a man like Ellsworth Johnson. It's a war room. And the war has already begun. By 4:47 p.m., 3 men would be found in different locations throughout Sing Sing. The medical reports would use clinical terms like catastrophic spinal trauma and permanent paralysis. The prison would launch an investigation that would lead nowhere, and Red Kowalski's crew would learn what Harlem had known for 3 decades: respect isn't requested from Bumpy Johnson. It's enforced with surgical precision. The story of how 3 men lost the ability to walk in less time than it takes to watch a movie is a warning that history has tried to hide. If you enjoy these deep dives into the underworld, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now, let's Let's go back to March 16, 1957, and understand how a man with a broken nose orchestrated systematic retribution from inside a locked cell. Sing Sing Correctional Facility did not see Ellsworth Johnson as just another body in khaki. When he arrived in July 1956 on federal narcotics conspiracy charges, the administration filed paperwork. The yard recognized something different, a reference point around which the entire ecosystem would reorganize. This was J. Edgar Hoover's personal victory in the systematic dismantling of Harlem's numbers racket, but inside these limestone walls, men understood the arrest differently. They had caged Harlem's uncrowned king, and kings do not abdicate simply because their throne moves behind bars. For 3 decades before those cell doors closed, Bumpy had engineered order in a world built on chaos. He enforced for Stephanie St. Clair during the numbers wars, staring down Dutch Schultz's machine when most black operators were expected to fold or die. Later, he negotiated with Italian families, transforming Harlem from prey into partner, forcing respect from men who saw his community as nothing but revenue streams. On Lenox Avenue, mothers who never touched a bet still sent their sons to him when trouble circled. He paid rents when landlords threatened eviction, covered funeral costs when families faced poverty, made sure old men had food in winter. In Harlem, Bumpy was not feared like a rabid dog. He was regarded like a necessary institution. Sing Sing operated on brutal mathematics. Guards supplemented pathetic salaries by smuggling contraband and selling protection. Racial lines cut through every corridor like battle trenches. Italians clustered with Italians, Southern whites with their own, Harlem men maintaining their territories. One insult in the shower, one shove in the chow line, and the entire facility could explode into riots that nobody could fully control. Into this powder keg walked Bumpy Johnson, and within 8 months, he had become something the prison had never seen, a diplomatic force maintaining equilibrium between warring factions. He accomplished this through strategic silence and calculated investments. When the Aryan Brotherhood planned to jump a black inmate over gambling debts, Bumpy paid the debt and negotiated peace. When Latin kings needed medical supplies for a diabetic member, Bumpy used outside connections to smuggle insulin through corrupt guards. He never demanded immediate payment. He built networks of obligations that functioned like invisible armor, preventing problems rather than creating them. Then, Victor Kowalski arrived from Attica in February 1957 with 2 enforcers and a reputation painted in blood. Red earned his nickname from the violence he left behind, not his hair color. At Attica, he had carved territory by systematically beating anyone who challenged white supremacy. His methods were theatrical and brutal: public beatings in cafeterias, coordinated shower attacks, constant verbal humiliation designed to establish dominance through fear. Prison officials transferred him to Sing Sing because Attica's warden wanted him gone before he triggered full-scale warfare. Red immediately began his territorial campaign, targeting black inmates in the yard, making loud comments about Harlem gangsters getting soft, questioning why a 51-year-old man in reading glasses commanded respect from younger, stronger convicts. His crew, Tommy Marcone and Earl Davidson, backed every play with mindless loyalty. For 2 weeks, Red escalated his disrespect while Bumpy continued reading books, playing chess, maintaining diplomatic silence. What Red mistook for weakness was observation. What he interpreted as fear was calculation. Bumpy had been studying Red's patterns, identifying weaknesses, cataloging vulnerabilities since his arrival. He had already determined that Red represented a threat to the delicate peace keeping Sing Sing from chaos. He had already decided the appropriate response. Red had been watching Bumpy for 2 weeks, planning his move. What he didn't know was that Bumpy had been watching him for 8 months and had already decided his fate. The punch to the nose wouldn't start a war, it would end a very brief negotiation period. The steel door of solitary confinement clicked shut at 2:45 p.m., sealing Bumpy Johnson inside 6 feet by 8 feet of concrete and calculation. The air carried the stale weight of unwashed bodies and institutional disinfectant, but Bumpy sat on the narrow bunk with his back straight against the cold wall, methodically cleaning dried blood from his wire-rimmed glasses. Guard Morrison approached the bars 7 minutes later with a damp towel, sliding it through the slot without words. Morrison had worked Sing Sing for 19 years and recognized the difference between broken men and men who used breaking points as strategic advantages. Inside these limestone walls, the Bureau of Prisons printed no meaningful currency. The real economy operated on cigarettes, postage stamps, commissary credits, and the most valuable commodity of all, life debts that transcended normal prison transactions. Bumpy had spent 8 months making investments that appeared charitable but functioned as insurance policies activated through surgical precision rather than emotional impulse. 3 men owed him obligations that could not be repaid with cigarettes or commissary credits. Marcus Webb, a thin kid from Georgia, had been cornered in the showers by 5 Aryan Brotherhood predators during his second week. Bumpy stepped between them with nothing but reputation and a calm conversation with their shot caller, transforming certain gang rape into negotiated peace. Jerome Little J. Patterson faced 25 years until Bumpy used outside connections to hire an appeals lawyer who found prosecutorial misconduct, reducing the sentence to 8 years. Carlos Ruiz's wife and 3 children were 3 weeks from eviction when Bumpy made one phone call to Harlem, and suddenly the back rent was paid with 2 months' advance. At 3:04 p.m., Bumpy tapped a specific rhythm on the heating pipe running through his cell. The communication network inside Sing Sing operated like a nervous system, patterns of metallic knocks traveling through plumbing, notes hidden inside hollowed soap bars passed by trustees, whispered instructions from corrupt guards on quiet payroll. Within minutes, Trustee Williams walked past solitary with a mop bucket, and a folded piece of paper disappeared through the food slot without breaking stride. The message contained no emotions, no threats, no dramatic declarations. It listed 3 names, 3 locations, 3 time windows, and 3 specific medical outcomes. The instructions were mathematical: targeted nerve damage, permanent paralysis, maximum educational impact with minimum fatality risk. Bumpy understood that dead men become martyrs, but broken men become breathing warnings that remind everyone what happens when respect is forgotten. The targets were systematic. Red Kowalski was the head, but Tommy Marcone and Earl Davidson formed the enforcement structure that enabled his disrespect. All 3 required permanent removal from the ecosystem through irreversible physical consequences. The timeline was non-negotiable. All strikes completed before 5 p.m. evening count, all appearing unconnected to prevent facility-wide lockdown, all delivering consequences that would echo through Sing Sing for decades. The weapons were already positioned throughout the facility. Marcus Webb had spent 3 days sharpening a mop handle against concrete, creating a weighted striking tool wrapped in towels that would leave no obvious evidence. Little J had access to industrial cleaning supplies in the machine shop, chemicals that could create believable accident scenarios. Carlos worked maintenance and understood the blind spots in every corridor, the 30-second windows where guards rotated positions and surveillance cameras couldn't capture certain angles. By 3:15 p.m., 90 minutes after the punch, 3 separate teams were moving through their normal routines while carrying instructions that would permanently alter 3 lives. Red was in the recreation yard, shooting basketball with his remaining supporters, laughing about teaching the old man respect, completely unaware that the old man was teaching him a lesson in consequences from inside a locked cell. He had no idea he was already a dead man walking. Worse than dead, he would spend the rest of his life wishing for death. The industrial laundry facility at Sing Sing operated with a deafening rhythm of steam presses and churning washers that could swallow screams as easily as conversations. At 3:47 p.m., Tommy Marcone moved through the humid air with the swagger of a man who believed consequences only applied to other people. Steam rose in lazy waves from massive washing drums, mixing with the sharp sting of detergent and bleach, creating an atmosphere thick enough to hide both sound and movement. 2 hours earlier, he had watched Red break Bumpy Johnson's nose in the mess hall, and the victory had inflated his confidence like a balloon ready to burst. Tommy carried his reputation from Chicago's South Side, where he had specialized in debt collection through systematic brutality. His favorite targets were black gamblers who came up short on payments. At Stateville Penitentiary, he had hospitalized 4 men before transferring to Sing Sing, building his legend on broken jaws and shattered fingers delivered with casual cruelty. 2 guards on C Block accepted monthly payments to ensure Tommy faced no consequences for his violence, creating a bubble of protection he mistook for genuine power. Prison officials knew his history but considered him useful for maintaining certain power structures that benefited the administration. 2 inmates worked the folding stations near the back wall, their movements mechanical and unremarkable. Marcus Webb and Jerome Patterson had been assigned to laundry detail 3 weeks earlier through positions orchestrated by Bumpy's connections with a sympathetic guard who owed gambling debts to Harlem contacts. The timing had been coordinated through the communication network with military precision, guard rotation schedules, machine maintenance logs. The specific moment when Tommy would be isolated near the industrial dryers where cameras couldn't capture certain angles. Marcus approached with casual ease, wiping his hands on a towel. "Hey Tommy, you catch the Yankees game on the radio yesterday?" Mantle hit 2 home runs off the Senators. Tommy grunted, focused on loading wet sheets into the industrial dryer. "Mantle's overrated. Give me Ted Williams any day." "Williams is Boston, man. You can't root for Boston in New York." Jerome joined the conversation, creating a triangle formation that appeared natural but positioned Tommy exactly where he needed to be, back turned to Marcus, facing away from the corridor entrance, completely relaxed in what he considered his territory. The weapon was simple but devastating, a heavy iron bar wrapped tightly in 3 layers of industrial towels to muffle impact sound while delivering maximum kinetic force to precise anatomical targets. Marcus moved with surgical precision, not anger. The strike connected with the C4 vertebrae at the base of Tommy's neck, calculated to sever specific nerve connections without crushing the spinal cord completely or causing immediate death. Tommy dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The impact made almost no sound beyond a dull thud absorbed by towel wrapping. Paralysis flooded down from his chest, erasing sensation and motor control, transforming a violent enforcer into a broken body still processing what had happened. He tried to scream, but his diaphragm wouldn't cooperate, producing only a strangled gasp as he collapsed forward. As consciousness began fading, his mind made the only connection that mattered. How did he... From solitary? He whispered through lips, rapidly losing feeling. Guards discovered him 23 minutes later during routine rounds, assuming heat exhaustion or equipment accident had caused the collapse. During medical examination at the prison infirmary, a nurse found folded paper in Tommy's work shirt pocket. The handwriting was perfect. Each letter formed with careful precision. 1 of 3. Respect is not optional. While guards rushed Tommy to the prison infirmary, Earl the Hammer Davidson was walking into the machine shop for his afternoon shift. He had heard nothing about his partner's accident. He suspected nothing. He had exactly 14 minutes left as an able-bodied man. The machine shop at Sing Sing was a cathedral of noise and danger at 4:10 p.m., where the air vibrated with the scream of high-speed drills and the rhythmic thunder of hydraulic presses. Earl the Hammer Davidson stood at his station, guiding metal through spinning blades while replaying the sweet memory of Red's fist connecting with Bumpy Johnson's nose. Sweat darkened his prison uniform as he chuckled with another inmate, treating the mess hall incident like championship boxing rather than the declaration of war it actually represented. Earl's nickname came from his preferred method of enforcement, holding down inmates while systematically breaking their fingers 1 knuckle at a time with a ball-peen hammer. At Leavenworth, he had shattered an inmate's entire hand for touching his commissary. At Attica, he destroyed 3 fingers of a black inmate accused of disrespecting Red with nothing more than a glance. Prison officials knew his reputation but considered him useful for maintaining order through fear, another tool in the complicated ecosystem where official rules and unofficial violence existed in careful balance. Carlos Ruiz worked maintenance throughout the facility, his mechanical skills making him valuable for keeping aging equipment functional. Grease was permanently etched under his fingernails, and his wife and 3 children still had a roof over their heads in Spanish Harlem because Bumpy Johnson had made 1 phone call 8 months earlier. That debt could never be repaid with cigarettes or commissary credits. At 4:13 p.m., Carlos triggered a carefully orchestrated malfunction in the massive hydraulic press situated between two towering industrial units. This corridor was a blind spot where surveillance cameras couldn't capture certain angles, and guard sight lines were blocked by steel pillars and institutional apathy. "Hey, Earl, can you check this press? The safety mechanism is jammed and I can't get it moving." Earl walked over with heavy steps, wiping metal shavings from his hands. You maintenance guys can't fix anything without help. He positioned himself exactly where Carlos needed him, back exposed to the machinery's unforgiving metal surfaces, completely focused on the supposed malfunction, feeling safe in what he considered his territory. The attack came from behind with calculated physics rather than random violence. Carlos had loosened the pneumatic release valve 10 minutes earlier while positioning the heavy steel counterweight at the precise angle. Two inmates, one Carlos had recruited, one who owed Bumpy protection from sexual predators, delivered a forceful, measured shove that drove Earl backward just as the counterweight swung down with mechanical inevitability. The impact wasn't a dull thud, but the sickening crunch of bone-meeting, unyielding iron. The steel edge caught Earl exactly at the L1-L2 vertebrae junction, the precise location where the spinal cord controls lower body function. The geometry was horrific in its perfection, crushing nerve pathways while avoiding immediate fatal damage. Earl's legs stopped working instantly, transforming from functional limbs into dead weight that no longer belonged to him. He collapsed forward, catching himself with his arms while his brain struggled to process signals that would never arrive from below his waist. 3 inmates worked at nearby stations, their drill presses and grinders creating acoustic cover that swallowed his initial grunt of shock. When questioned later, they would remember only machinery sounds. Nothing unusual, certainly no violence. 20 minutes passed before guards discovered Earl during routine rounds. He was conscious, screaming through tears and confusion, dragging himself across the oily floor while his useless legs trailed behind like foreign objects. "I can't feel my legs. What happened to my legs?" The panic in his voice carried the realization that his life as an enforcer had ended in the time it takes to check a jammed machine. During medical assessment, a guard found folded paper tucked inside Earl's work glove. The handwriting matched the note found on Tommy Marcone, each letter formed with identical precision, 2 of 3. Payment in progress. 2 down in 23 minutes. The prison was starting to buzz with nervous energy. Guards were scrambling between the infirmary and incident reports. But Red still didn't know about his crew's fate. He was in the recreation yard, shooting basketball with his remaining supporters, his back turned to the entrance. He had exactly 7 minutes left in his old life. The recreation yard at 4:33 p.m. served as Victor Kowalski's stage for a performance built on ignorance. Red commanded center court with the swagger of a man who believed he had just humiliated the most feared gangster in New York State, bouncing a basketball lazily while his remaining supporters clustered around him like courtiers attending a false king. "You see that old man's face when I broke his nose? Thought he was still running Harlem from behind bars." Today, he learned this is a white man's house. His laughter echoed off limestone walls, mixing with the metallic rattle of chain-link fencing and the hollow bounce of rubber on cracked concrete. Trustee Williams approached at 4:35 p.m. With practiced institutional neutrality, clipboard in hand and eyes appropriately lowered. Williams was another man whose sister still lived in her Harlem apartment because Bumpy Johnson had arranged an envelope of rent money at the precise moment eviction papers were being drafted. "Kowalski, Assistant Warden needs to see you immediately. Administrative review about your transfer paperwork from Attica." The summons carried the bureaucratic banality that raised no alarm bells in Red's mind. Routine institutional inconvenience that required solo attendance. Red tossed the basketball to a supporter and strutted toward the main building, telling his crew to wait outside because administrative meetings were individual affairs. The route took him through D Block's main corridor, a path deliberately suggested to the trustee by men whose loyalties operated on frequencies Red couldn't detect. The hallway stretched 60 feet between guard stations with a specific 30-second blind spot where architectural oversight and institutional laziness created a pocket of vulnerability that maintenance had never bothered to address. 4 men were already positioned at strategic intervals throughout the corridor, standing in plain institutional daylight rather than hiding in shadows. Marcus Webb, Jerome Patterson, Carlos Ruiz, and Samuel Big Sam Washington, different races, different backgrounds, unified only by life debts owed to a man currently sitting in solitary confinement. Each had been saved by Bumpy's intervention, protection from gang rape, sentence reduction through legal connections, family eviction prevented, contract killings stopped. These weren't favors, they were investments activated through surgical precision rather than emotional impulse. The ambush began at 4:37 p.m., with coordinated efficiency that transformed violence into mathematics. Big Sam grabbed Red from behind, driving him forward into the concrete wall with enough force to stun without rendering unconscious. The next 45 seconds were calculated brutality focused entirely on Red's lower spine, kidneys, and legs, designed for maximum permanent damage with minimal fatality risk. Marcus targeted the L3 vertebrae with a weighted soap bar wrapped in towels. Jerome struck the L4-L5 junction with a sharpened mop handle designed to distribute crushing force without penetrating skin. Carlos delivered precise kidney strikes calculated to cause maximum internal damage. Big Sam controlled Red's upper body, preventing defensive movement while ensuring each blow landed exactly where anatomy dictated permanent consequences. Red remained conscious throughout, his brain processing each impact while understanding flooded his eyes. This wasn't random prison violence, this was systematic destruction, orchestrated from inside a locked cell, delivered by men paying debts that transcended normal prison economics. His legs stopped responding. Pain exploded through his lower back. The realization hit harder than any physical blow. He had broken Bumpy Johnson's nose, and Bumpy had broken his entire future. At 4:41 p.m., Bumpy Johnson walked out of solitary confinement at his scheduled release time, wire-rimmed glasses sitting perfectly straight despite his swollen nose and blood-stained uniform. He walked past Red's broken body sprawled in the hallway 8 minutes after the attack, while the 4 attackers had already dispersed back to normal routines. Bumpy crouched down slowly, bringing his face close to Red's ear. His voice carried no anger, no triumph, just cold statement of fact. You had 2 hours. I gave you mercy. I could have made it hurt more. He placed a folded note on Red's chest as guards finally rounded the corner, their whistles beginning to blow. The handwriting matched the previous notes, each letter formed with identical precision, 3 of 3. Lesson complete. Respect is earned through understanding. As medics rushed Red to join his paralyzed crew in the prison hospital, Bumpy Johnson walked calmly back to his cell. His nose was still broken, his uniform still stained with his own blood. But every inmate in Sing Sing now understood the new mathematics of respect, disrespect has a price, and Bumpy Johnson always collects with compound interest. The investigation launched at 5:15 p.m., with the institutional efficiency of men paid to document chaos without understanding it. Deputy Warden Hutchins assembled incident reports from 3 separate locations, interviewed 47 inmates who claimed to have seen nothing, and searched for weapons that had already been disassembled into component parts or flushed through plumbing systems designed to swallow evidence. Despite dozens of inmates present at each location, despite surveillance cameras positioned throughout the facility, despite guard rotations that should have created overlapping observation, the official record contained nothing but blank spaces where answers should have existed. The conspiracy of silence was absolute and terrifying in its uniformity. Inmates who normally cooperated with authorities for sentence reductions suddenly developed selective amnesia that defied every interrogation technique the system possessed. Men facing decades behind bars refused deals that could have cut years from their sentences. Even inmates with no connection to Bumpy Johnson or his network understood the new mathematics governing Sing Sing. Speaking meant becoming the fourth cautionary tale, and silence meant survival. This wasn't just fear of retribution, it was respect for surgical competence. Bumpy's reputation for both protection and systematic retribution had created an impenetrable wall that no amount of institutional pressure could breach. Every inmate performed the same cold calculation. Talking meant isolation, and isolation meant eventually facing consequences no guard could prevent. Medical reports documented a puzzle that disturbed prison doctors in ways they couldn't officially acknowledge. Dr. Weiss noted 3 victims permanently paralyzed through completely different methods, yet achieving identical devastating results. Tommy Marcone presented with C4 vertebrae damage consistent with precise blunt force trauma. Earl Davidson showed L1, L2 crushing injuries matching industrial equipment contact. Red Kowalski displayed multiple vertebrae fractures across L3, L5, suggesting coordinated strikes from multiple angles. The injuries appeared almost surgical in their targeting of specific nerve pathways, delivering permanent paralysis while avoiding immediate death. Privately, medical staff admitted the pattern suggested anatomical knowledge and deliberate design rather than random prison violence. The official narrative emerged through bureaucratic necessity rather than investigative success. 3 separate unfortunate accidents involving industrial equipment, statistical anomalies on an otherwise routine Saturday afternoon. Paperwork was filed with appropriate stamps and signatures, labeled as equipment-related injuries. Reports were forwarded to Albany, where administrators chose not to investigate what they didn't want to find. The system understood that some questions led to answers that exposed uncomfortable truths about how prisons actually functioned, and institutional survival required maintaining convenient fictions rather than confronting systematic failure. Red Kowalski was transferred to the prison hospital ward permanently, facing 12 remaining years maneuvering a wheelchair through corridors where he once walked like a king. His reputation evaporated instantly, dissolving like sugar in water as former allies avoided him completely, recognizing that association with failure carried its own consequences. Tommy Marcone and Earl Davidson occupied adjacent beds, transformed from enforcers into living ghosts. Cautionary tales wheeled out to sun themselves in the yard, permanent reminders of the price of disrespecting the wrong man. Their broken bodies served as Bumpy's most effective propaganda, silent billboards advertising the consequences of miscalculation that required no explanation or repetition. The immediate impact rippled through Sing Sing with seismic force that recalibrated every power structure within 72 hours. Attacks on black inmates stopped completely overnight. Racial dynamics that had governed the facility for decades shifted as the delicate ecosystem recognized undeniable reality. Bumpy Johnson could orchestrate systematic destruction from inside a locked cell. The casual slurs, the predatory behavior in showers, the jostling in chow lines all ceased as if someone had thrown a switch. Even guards modified their behavior, treating Bumpy with careful deference that acknowledged his position as something beyond standard inmate classification. Bumpy served his final 6 years without a single disciplinary infraction, walking out of Sing Sing in 1963 not just as a released convict, but as a legend refined and sharpened by incarceration. The story of the 2-hour war spread through the federal prison system like wildfire, becoming criminal folklore that transcended individual facilities. In Atlanta, Lewisburg, and Leavenworth, men traded versions of the same narrative, establishing a template for smart violence over chaotic brutality that would influence criminal thinking for decades. Years later, in a rare moment of reflection captured during an interview, Bumpy articulated the philosophy that guided his hand that afternoon with characteristic precision. Violence is a language. Most men scream it. I whisper it. And everyone listens. 3 men entered Sing Sing thinking they could break Bumpy Johnson. They broke his nose. He broke their futures. The mathematics were simple. Disrespect plus time equals permanent consequences. For the next 6 years, not a single inmate dared even look at Bumpy Johnson the wrong way. Respect, he had proven once again, is not given, it is taken. and sometimes it is carved into the spine of those foolish enough to forget that lesson.